Grace to you and peace. My name is Steve Shusett, and I'm the resource staff and stated clerk for the Presbytery of the Highlands. And I'm also the staff person for the Committee on Preparation for Ministry. And this is part 3, Training for the Committee on Preparation for Ministry, a review of the Presbytery's manual. If you don't have a copy of the manual in front of you, you'll see many of the relevant portions on the screens ahead, and you can always go back and refer to it at your convenience. We're now picking up with the field education portion of the manual. You will find that on page 17 or thereabouts. The purpose of field education is to make sure that the student has the opportunity to develop basic skills, get a sense of their sense of call, to discern their gifts for ministry, to put together the theology that they're studying with their theories and their experience, to develop their own pastoral identity and character, and to build a network of people in the church, pastors, ruling elders, others, who can be references for them, who can be sounding boards for them, who can give them the kind of feedback that you need in real life experience. The requirements for field education will ordinarily be accomplished part-time, which means 10 to 12 hours a week, during a full academic year, so while they are taking classes or following graduation. They also need to have one unit of clinical pastoral education, normally in an institutional setting, and this CPE unit must be distinct from the field education experience. Field education and CPE positions are open only to second and third year students, and this field education cannot take place in their home church. It's expected that in this field education, that the student will get a well-rounded parish experience. That means they will take part in leading worship, occasionally preaching. They will have opportunities for other pastoral responsibilities. They can go with the pastor on visits, participate in weddings and funerals. They can attend session meetings as their schedule allows, and any other activities that might be useful for them in their education, leading Bible studies or adult classes, assisting in youth ministry, having a particular project for a given year, that they are going to do something bigger, longer term, something that will require planning and working with other people, working with a committee. In this field education process, the pastor and the candidate should meet at least weekly. They should not be doing preaching outside of the field education placement, because then they are preaching and they aren't going to get the feedback that they need from someone else. During this field education period, they would, participate as a liturgist, as a reader, doing other things on Sunday mornings where they can get feedback from their supervisor. Ordinarily, field education will take place over the full academic year or after graduation, as I said, but whenever it takes place, it should include the entire liturgical and program calendar. That means Essentially, they should experience Advent through Pentecost, and they should experience September when the program year begins, so perhaps even August when the planning is really in full swing into the program year. And so, however, that period of time is covered, that can work. So, for some, the academic year means they start in August and then they would continue at least through Pentecost. But for some, they might not be able to start until late in the summer, or I should say, what would make sense here? They could begin prior to Easter during Lent and carry through over the summer with intermittent visits, et cetera, and then pick up again in the fall, continuing through into past Christmas or into Lent following year. So, however it is, they get the complete experience of both the liturgical year that they'll be living with and the program year that they'll be living with. That's the important part. Before they begin, the student needs to submit their field education plan to CPM and have it approved. And that plan will include how expectations are met that we've already discussed. And then there'll be midpoint and final evaluations that will include actual goals and achievements in those same categories. So halfway through the year, they'll get a review of how they're doing. And that's something they will submit to CPM. And then at the end, there will be compensation provided by the supervising church, and that's arranged between the student, the church, and the seminary. And those arrangements shall be included in the field education plan that's given to CPM. If this is happening through the seminary, which is ideal, they already have standards and expectations. Otherwise, the student will have to negotiate that with the church. And stipends are taxable based on IRS guidelines. And we've left that purposefully directive and vague because those IRS guidelines may change. So it's really up to the student to make sure they are doing what they need to do in terms of taxes. In the manual, the first part is for the students. The second part for prospective and approved field education supervisors is essentially the same material with some questions for the supervisor to better think about what kind of experience they would be offering the student, because that's part of the plan is for us to make sure they are getting a well-rounded experience. And this is for the supervisor to make sure they're thinking about how to provide a well-rounded experience. This material is really more for the local pastors of the presbytery who provide supervision than for supervisors found by the seminary. Again, it's ideal if it happens through the seminary because they have a process, a way of making sure things are happening the way they should. It's a little less direct when it happens through the presbytery because it's something that doesn't happen a lot. But we did want to make sure we have something for those cases, which will probably be happening more and more as we have students who aren't necessarily going through a PCUSA seminary that's set up to provide a PCUSA field education experience. I mentioned clinical pastoral education a few moments ago regarding field ed to make sure it's understood that a student needs a unit of field ed and they need a unit of clinical pastoral education. And you can see that there are standards by which CPE is accredited. And so we need to make sure that this is a program that is accredited. Um, and we will have to get a copy of their final evaluation sent to the chair or the moderator of CPM. And the results of this evaluation will be shared just with the committee and then left in the inquirer or candidates file. And really, it should just say candidates file because you can't do field education or CP until you are at least in your candidacy stage. As noted before, this one required unit of CPE ordinarily takes place in an institutional setting and has to be distinct from the field ed experience. So, the institutional setting is so that they get that kind of experience, and particularly because hospitals are best equipped to provide this. There are CPE programs that can be done through the church, through a church, not the student's home church. That's a different form of CPE. It can be acceptable for subsequent units of CPE. If a student's interested in becoming a chaplain, they'll need as many units as they can get. And other means besides the institutional can be utilized then. But we do look for the institutional setting for the one unit that's required by CPM. And again, it has to be distinct from the field ed experience when it comes to the one unit to meet this requirement. The reason for that is otherwise, a student in the church setting, for example, there really isn't a way to distinguish between what they're doing for CPE and what they're doing for field ed. And there are hour requirements for each of these independently. So if a student were doing field ed and CPE at the same time, that 400 hours or thereabouts that they're required to do for each of these would be double dipping. Other students would be doing 400 hours of field ed and 400 hours of CPE. A student who is doing these at the same time might only do 400 hours for both or 600 hours between the two. So, in the interest of equity and in making sure that this experience is all that it's meant to be and not a combination that reduces the effectiveness of both, these are meant to be distinct experiences. Students are expected to submit copies of their transcript to the CPM moderators so that they can be put into their file. An unofficial transcript, when the student just gets a copy, a PDF, it says photocopy, which is, I suppose, still possible, but many will just get PDFs and that's what they'll send to us. That's acceptable throughout the seminary process, with the exception of the final transcript. Then we need an official transcript with their receipt, and it would have a seal, a raised seal, and it has to be mailed from the seminary to CPM and be sent to the presbytery office as long as we have it in our possession, and again, put into the file for the student. At some point, the student will get to the stage in their final year when they will take the majority of their ordination exams. Often not thought of as an ordination exam is the Bible content exam. And that's one of the ordination exams that has to be passed. But this one should be taken and passed as soon as possible because an inquirer can't become a candidate until they pass the Bible content exam. Um, there are samples available on the PCUSA website with sample exams, old exams. Students benefit by looking at old questions because often they repeat. But one of the things we strongly recommend, and as a liaison, this is something you can speak to your student about. It may come up in their early annual consultations or when they first meet before they're really in seminary, is that students really benefit from taking the Old Testament and New Testament surveys that they're going to have to take at some point, but to take them as soon as possible and then take the Bible content exam afterward. Um, some students, many students, will have sufficient Bible knowledge and looking at the Old Test will serve them well, and they may pass. Um, but if a student is showing difficulty in passing, make sure that they have taken those introductory classes on the Bible, the Old and New Testament classes, so that they have even more depth and knowledge of Scripture before they take it, if they're having trouble taking it. That is, as I said, the first ordination exam, not usually thought of in terms of ordination exams, but it is an exam from the denomination that has to be passed before a student can be ordained. And in this presbytery, before they can even become a candidate. When it comes to the more traditionally considered ordination exams, the candidate has to get CPM's approval before they can take any of them. And those are the Bible exegesis exam, polity, theology, and worship and sacraments. These exams can only be taken once the student has entered their final year. Now, of course, that becomes a little more complicated with non-traditional students who aren't in a 3-year program where they finish in 3 years, but where they are part-time. And then you're looking at credit hours as opposed to the 3rd year of seminary. So you'll need to do your homework there and make sure they have the credits and are in a position to take the ordination exams. Normally, at the annual consultation, the student will ask for permission to take those exams. Um, but if they don't, then you may need to have a special meeting with them. You may be able to get permission at a subsequent meeting, but somehow permission has to be given. And these days, it really has to be given because of the electronic process we use. The CPM moderator will have to verify that the student has permission to take the exam. And it is the student's responsibility to apply and to pay for these exams. This is not something that the presbytery covers. Although, as we'll see later, there are funds they can receive that they could use toward this. It is not common that this happens, but it does happen. And as we've said before, in a way, it should happen one way or the other. The removal from covenant relationship. Once someone is an inquirer or a candidate, they are an inquirer or a candidate until the presbytery acts one way or another to end this relationship. So the traditional way, the way that one believes will happen at the beginning of this process, is at some point the candidate will be deemed ready, certified ready for ordination, ready to receive a call, and then they will receive a call from a presbytery, from some entity, and there's the process we go through to help someone become ordained. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But it's also true that persons under care can withdraw from the process. They simply have to notify CPM and their session that they've withdrawn. The presbytery has to be informed. It's normally just a notation in the CPM report that's received by the presbytery. Um, and they may do so for whatever reason they feel it's necessary. And this is the part I've said before, that this is not a failure on anyone's part. This is actually showing the process is doing what it's supposed to do. If someone realizes they aren't called to ordained ministry, or to the ministry of word and sacrament, to be more precise, because they could be called to be a ruling elder at some point, or they may already be one when they enter seminary. But they may decide they aren't called to be a minister of word and sacrament. And if they withdraw from that, that's actually, if that's God's will, then that's what we are hoping will be achieved. The third way in which someone is removed from the covenant relationship, and again, this would be the rarest of the possibilities, is that for whatever reason, CPM may determine that an inquirer or a candidate is not suitable for ordered ministry as a minister of word and sacrament, and that this person is not going to be deemed ready or certified for fitness, and it's better for everyone that this relationship end rather than further time and expense put into something that isn't going to happen. If a person is removed from the process by CPM, CPM has to report its actions to the session of the presbytery. And CPM is going to have to explain in every possible way why this has happened, and to be supportive and caring. They have to explain why this decision's been made, emphasizing their strengths and the gifts they have, as well as the weaknesses that led to this decision. And it may be that the committee can meet with the person and talk about the alternatives of ministry that they could pursue. Again, the church needs good ruling elders, and this person's lack of fitness for ministry might not mean they can't be a good ruling elder in a church. It's hard to imagine the reasons why someone might be found in this situation, but if CPM feels it's necessary, again, this is extremely rare, and then the church pastor and liaison should be contacted to explain what's going on, give the reasons, the alternatives, and then if the person still is not convinced this is true, they and their advocates can meet with CPM. Again, this is not a very common experience. Much more common is the person completes the requirements and goes on to become a teaching elder, or the person themselves decides this isn't really what they're called to. Readiness for ministry, excuse me, the final assessment. During the second half of their senior year, which for traditional students is after January, again, you're going to have to keep track of students who are part-time, candidates can begin the steps toward becoming ready to receive a call. And these steps have to be completed before CPM will consider the candidate ready, and therefore to be presented to the presbytery for examination for ordination. The person has to be a candidate for at least a year. They're going to have to provide a sermon, and that sermon will eventually be preached in front of the committee or parts of the committee. They're going to have to provide the exegesis that supports that sermon and their statement of faith. Bear in mind, CPM doesn't approve the statement of faith, but they can be asked to comment, to give their input, to raise questions that they have. And in fact, I would recommend that CPM take that process very seriously, because the questions you ask in committee are answers that can be provided when the student goes before the presbytery, when the questions can be more pointed and there's much more on the line. But if you have a question about the theology or the way something's written that you don't find it as clear as you need, definitely let the student know so that they can edit it, make changes, improve upon it. And the student is going to have to meet with CPM to discuss all aspects of preparation and readiness for ministry. And that's important because when the student goes before a subsequent presbytery meeting, um, everything is fair game to ask. They can be asked about their faith journey. They can be asked about their intentions. They can be asked about their theology. They can be asked about all kinds of things. And they need to be as ready as they can be. And so if you're asking all aspects of preparation and readiness, again, they're all the more prepared when they are going before a presbytery. It's CPM's responsibility to certify that the candidate is ready to receive a call. And certification of the validity of a particular call is the responsibility of the presbytery in which the calling body or church is located. So, what does that mean? It means that the presbytery, whichever presbytery is issuing the call for this person to be ordained, um, there are different responsibilities. It is this presbytery's responsibility to make sure that the student is ready to receive a call. And then the determination of whether the student is going to receive a call is dependent on where the calling body is. So if they're called in Highlands, Highlands will do that examination. When they are called by another presbytery, that presbytery will decide whether or not they are ready to be ordained. But it's this presbytery's responsibility to make sure they are as ready as they can be for whatever presbytery to make that determination. So we're here to get them ready, to make sure they're as ready for whatever presbytery that they find themselves called to. When another presbytery is issuing the call, CPM has to assess the student's readiness. And if you look in the Book of Order, G20607, you'll see that what CPM is looking for, what a presbytery will be looking for, is wisdom and maturity of faith, leadership skills, a compassionate spirit, honest repute, and sound judgment. Those are all things that we should be looking for as a CPM. And those are things that, in one way or another, people will be looking for in them when they are looking to call them, and what a presbytery will be looking at to examine them. But some of those things are things that we are in a much better position um, to make a determination on, because we will have been with them for 3 years or more. And so we will have heard their compassionate spirit. We will have had experience with them in terms of their honesty and their judgment. We will have seen their leadership skills. We'll have seen them mature in faith. Those are things we can, to the best of our abilities, say to our presbytery or another presbytery, this candidate has those gifts. About a year before the student believes they're going to graduate, and again, that becomes a little more complicated with a non-traditional student because we don't know exactly when they'll be graduating a year out. But about a year out, candidates are encouraged to begin writing their personal information form. This needs to be changed. I'm realizing that now. This now is called a personal discernment form, I believe. And So it's not a PIF anymore, but it's um, personal discernment form, I believe is what it's called, before they're going to graduate. Um, and this personal discernment form has to be submitted to the CPM moderators for the committee to review. Once all 5 ordination exams have been passed and completed all other requirements, then the CPM moderator or their designee has to give permission on CLC for circulation. And again, this is an electronic process, so there really aren't many people um, enabled to give that permission. The CPM moderator, one of the two, has permission to do that, and they can delegate that authority in some circumstances, but generally they would be the ones to do it. And they won't do it until CPM authorizes them. Um, Even though a student has submitted their personal discernment form, um, CPM's care for this candidate continues until the covenant relationship is dissolved. As I said, there are 3 ways that can happen. Until that happens, they're still under care and they continue to have annual consultations. Um, and that goes on for years, including perhaps to a point where the CPM has to say, are you still working? Are you still looking for a call? Is this still on the front burner for you, or is God calling you in other directions? But that would be after several years, because it can take a while for some students to receive a call. And the truth is, call is the 3-way process, and it's between an entity, a church or an organization, a presbytery, and the person. And while a student may feel called, if no one calls them, then perhaps they need to think about what God might have in mind for them in the future. From the Book of Order, we read, the presbytery placing the call to the candidate for ministry shall ordinarily examine, ordain, and install the candidate. So this is what I was speaking on before, although I feel like I was not as clear as I could have been. We get the student as ready as possible. If they receive a call, the presbytery that's called them will do the examination. That's why CPM doesn't approve someone's statement of faith. What CPM does is give guidance, and Highlands Presbytery or another presbytery will determine whether or not that statement of faith carries enough water and carry the weight. So we give guidance. We don't approve it because ultimately it will be this presbytery or another presbytery that, in approving the student's ability to be ordained for whatever position, they're in effect approving the statement of faith. So ordinarily, examine, ordain, and install. And primarily, the ordinarily refers to the ordain part. Um, the presbytery that's calling someone will examine them for membership in that presbytery, examine them for ordination, which by definition means once they're ordained, they're a member of that presbytery. Students sometimes ask for permission to be installed in their home church, ordained in their home church. And so they've been examined for a position here in Highlands Presbytery. The presbytery has examined them and says they can be ordained. And so they might ask to be ordained in the presbytery they grew up in their home church. But then they would have to be installed in the presbytery where they are serving. Installation happens in the presbytery you're serving. So, for an example, we have a student from the presbytery for Southern New Jersey. They wish to accept a position in Highlands Presbytery. Highlands will examine them. The student may say they'd like to be ordained and installed in the church where they are going to serve, or they could say, I would like to be installed or excuse me, ordained in the church where I grew up, and then be installed in the Highlands Presbytery congregation they've been called. So the only spot that there's any real flexibility is where they are ordained. Um, because money is a reality, um, something students need to think about. It's something we need to think about on their behalf. Um, there's a lot that can be said about financial matters and financial aid. That there's a lot that the student will be doing that has nothing to do with the presbytery. But this is to say the presbytery can provide a grant of $1,000 per academic year. The student would have to fill out the CPM financial aid form. They have to be enrolled in a program approved by CPM. We don't really check so much about satisfactory progress when it comes to this grant. Um, Certainly, we're paying attention to that, but we don't ask them to verify it as part of the application procedure. We do, as a committee, though, have to track the dates when grants are given and how many times. And the reason the how many times comes up is CPM really has not discussed, but really should, how many times could a non-traditional student receive a grant? A traditional student would get one 3 times. A non-traditional student could be carrying over many or several academic years, more than 3 if they're going part-time. That's a discussion CPM really needs to have. We can get those dates from the financial administrator for the presbytery, but it's good if we keep track of those ourselves, so that we don't need to ask someone else. We would know the information and we can put it on the tracking form that we use for students. I don't know that I've talked about that much, but we do have a tracking form for every student that has the exams they've taken, the steps of the process, and it goes chronologically through meeting with the session for the first time to receiving a call, and who their partner is in that process. And so on that form, there is a place where you can put in that they've received a grant. And so you can mark how many times they've received it. All the student really has to do is write a note to CPM, and email is fine, indicating the purpose for requesting the grant. And that can be books, housing, tuition, anything related to their seminary education. Not related to their seminary education, um, if they needed it for their 1/3 part of the psych eval, they could use the money for that, which is part of their seminary education, or at least part of the process. If they are asked to go for some additional counseling of some sort, they could use the money for that. Again, that's not exactly their seminary education, but it is part of the process of being under care. Um, and there is some flexibility in this process if CPM believes that's the case. And we would have to talk to the presbytery leader, perhaps the administration and coordinating team, if they need an additional grant, maybe things are going longer than they planned, or there's an unexpected expense that we are able to help with, but it exceeds that $1,000. If the student mentions it to the liaison or to the committee, that's something that can be brought to the committee, and the committee could decide to ask to see about getting a little extra money. This part of the manual probably needs to be revised because it makes things seem more complicated than or strict than they really are. We don't really ask about their financial aid award letter or a financial aid transcript or any of those things that the manual indicates. So, to summarize the student's financial responsibilities from our perspective, so again, this is separate from their degree, which is entirely with the seminary. But the student does have to provide a third of the psychological evaluation cost, split with the congregation and the presbytery. They do have to pay for their exams. They have to pay for their educational expenses, including books and fees, their housing and board, apart from that $1,000 that the seminary or the presbytery can provide. That can go toward any of those things. Fitness and readiness. A candidate cannot enter into negotiation for their service as a minister of word and sacrament without the approval of Highlands Presbytery. The presbytery will record when it's certified a candidate ready for examination for ordination, pending a call. Evidence of readiness to begin order and ministry as a minister of word and sacrament shall include, as we saw, maturity of faith, leadership skills, compassion, honesty, and sound judgment. And we'll need their transcripts from college, university, theological institution. We'll need to make sure that they're and finally, at the end of the manual, you will find a checklist. And this checklist actually, in many ways, indicates what is in that tracking form I mentioned a few moments ago. Goes through the whole process. This is in the manual. It's for the students, so they know what they have to do. It's for you as a liaison. It's for you as a committee, so that we can keep track of how students are doing and how they're progressing. It's just a way, one more way for us to keep track of their progress. That concludes this third part of our training. As further trainings are necessary, I will make sure to record them and make them available for your use. God be with you in this ministry.